introduce Jenny Boyd, the author of It's Not Only Rock and Roll. It's a great book, it's a good read, I've read through it myself. What we're going to talk about now, I'm going to ask Jenny a few questions, and then at the end of it, Jenny's happy to answer any questions from the audience. So I'll start off just by introducing Jenny. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jenny. First of all, the first part of the book I'd like to ask you about is that everyone will be interested in is your childhood, really, the childhood of the people that you interviewed.
Yeah, the childhood is one of the chapters in the book, and really what all the musicians, I interviewed 75 musicians, and what all of them say, except for two, is that their childhood was very happy, that they were nurtured, and their creativity was nurtured, which is a really important part. The two people that weren't nurtured were someone called, I just blanked on the name, Stephen Bishop. I don't know if anybody knows of Stephen Bishop. And Roger Waters. And Roger Waters said that he had a mother who hated rock and roll, said she was tone deaf. And so he became very destructive, as we all know. And so that's what they say, is if the creativity is not nurtured, then it can actually go in on yourself and you become destructive until you find someone who does support what you're doing and say that you're, that you're doing okay. So that happened with him when he thought he was going to be an architect, went to architecture school, and the teacher there let him sit at the back of the class and practice his guitar. That was his first time that he'd had somebody that believed in him and his creativity.
That was the same with Paul McCartney, wasn't it? Because Paul's parents, before his mum died, wanted them to go to teacher training. Mm-hmm. And then his dad was in the group on his own, and then Paul's nature was more creative, the creative side.
Right, yeah. Well, I do know with George that he said, although his parents loved music, it was the man down the street who taught him how to play the guitar. So somehow, most of them, even if they didn't have musical parents, or parents who were supporting them, they would find somebody else who would actually encourage their creativity.
Yeah. What about the ambition as well? Did you talk about the drive and the ambition of that phrase from being childhood to being more driven to go into the music side?
That's a huge part of it, that they all had this drive. Because you can have talent, but if you don't have the drive to keep on with your practice and learning, then you don't get anywhere. And so I was actually reading the bit that George talks about earlier today, just saying he knew that he wanted to play guitar because actually he didn't think he could do anything else. He would probably end up being a bum.
Well, that's what it was with George. When George was 13 and 14.
That's what I mean with him, yeah.
He got his first guitar when he was 12, mm-hmm. and he was just obsessed with trying to learn the chords, and that's when Paul started pushing him to be in the group.
Yeah. And they all had that kind of, it's like an obsession, but it's a drive. And they all talk about the drive that kept them going. And they also had this sense of destiny where they believed that there was something bigger that was going to be happening as they grew up. And
Did he go into the account of the day jobs, and we've got a day job now because our parents said, go and get a proper job?
Well, some of them had that. A proper job, yeah.
Go and get a proper job, as the old saying is, as we said. But there's also the creative side. Like I know when we were speaking to Hunter this morning, he said he witnessed some of the songwriting when he was in the Abbey Studios. I know yourself was in India.
Yeah.
With the Beatles.
Yeah. I was lucky to be in that position where George asked if I'd go to India with them all, and that was 1968. And what was so fantastic was that we all had our own little sort of bungalows, and within the bungalows were these rooms. And during the day, George and Paul and John and Ringo would go up and sit on the roof of the bungalow.
Wasn't Donovan there at the time?
Well, he was as well, but that was a little bit later. Yeah. But I would actually watch, whatever was going on. Like there was one day where John couldn't sleep because we were doing all this meditation. And so you just see them suddenly pick up their guitars and start writing a song about I couldn't sleep last night. But, when Prudence, because Prudence wasn't very well, and she kind of came to our bungalow and she was staring at the wall and nobody could get her out of this trance. So John went in there with his guitar, and then that's where the song Dear Prudence came from.
Yeah, and you actually see the creative bouncing off each other and the
Yeah.
ideas of...
Yeah, just in sort of daily life, they somehow make it creative. And there's another story that happened when I was in India, is that I got really sick. I was meditating and suddenly my temperature was really high and I couldn't think of what I should do. It was the middle of the night, so I went to go and see Maharishi, and he said, oh no, you've just got to keep meditating, you know, you just hit an iceberg. And so I carried on meditating, and then the next morning a doctor came round and I was told I had tonsillitis. So, a bit strange in India to have tonsillitis, but anyway, another doctor came a bit later on in the day and I was told it was dysentery. So then John and Cynthia came in, and John had done this drawing for me, and it was a picture of an Indian man with a turban on his head, and he's got a basket in front of him with a snake coming out, and underneath he's put, by the power that's in and the power that's out, I cast your tonsil lighthouse out. And unfortunately, I gave that picture to my mum and asked her to look after it. And what happened? She lost it.
She's probably in a house cleaning, frenzy and throwing it all out. But then, obviously, there's the fame side of it as well, because you've interviewed people about their first steps in fame. So you've got the childhood, the creative side, and then it moves on to the... How did you handle the fame? Did you touch on the subject of handling the fame?
Well, I think, are you talking about all the musicians generally?
The musicians generally.
My feeling was that they handled the fame. The fame wasn't so important as the importance, especially the songwriters, that they could keep writing. And what I did find with all these musicians was that, you know, sex, drugs and rock and roll and all the egos and all that, but actually every single one of them, I felt incredible humility. And what it is that they often didn't feel it was them that was writing the songs, but the songs were coming through them. And so there was a kind of humility to a higher power, if you like, and they all alluded to this.
Okay. So that you can see where that was coming from when you were speaking
Mhm.
to them. It was sort of like they was following the same path, and you realise, well, this is the path that this person spoke about.
Yeah,
This is the path that that person spoke about.
yeah.
So it seems to be coming across all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Also, as well, looking at the book itself, some of the people that you've interviewed, I'd like to touch on Julian Lennon, which is John's son. You've interviewed Julian Lennon as well.
Mm-hmm.
How did Julian feel with his dad being so famous? Did he feel that that was a bit of a baggage to carry with him, that his dad was so famous, or was he okay with it?
He seemed to be okay with it because he was a musician himself. So he was not struggling, but he was, working with his own songs and his own music. And this book actually came out 20 years ago, but it was called Musicians in Tune at that time. It only came out in America. And it's taken this long for it to come out in the UK, and edited it and called it, a different name. But so all these, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to interview George or Ravi Shankar, because, they're no longer with us. So it makes it more precious in a way. What they had to say.
But there's also as well Joni Mitchell that you interviewed as well.
I mean, she doesn't give interviews these days.
Yeah. And that would have been a scoop to get the interview at the time to see.
Yeah, and it was extraordinary because the whole thing to do with creativity is a lot to do with synchronicity. And I found, just wanting to put this book together, well, actually it was a dissertation originally, that the synchronicity was with me. It's like you feel you're riding a wave. And so I just needed to think about the musician I would like to interview, and suddenly I would come across them. Or somebody would say, oh, I just saw them yesterday, I can get you in touch. And so it happened all the time. I don't think nowadays one could actually get 75 well-known musicians and interview them all. It's much more difficult to get hold of them, and so it was very synchronistic the whole way it worked.
I know we touched on India a bit earlier, obviously with the boys being there. What was Ringo Starr's thoughts of India? Because didn't he leave India earlier?
Yeah, because he couldn't eat the onions.
Yeah.
He had a bad stomach. He couldn't cope with it. So he brought with him tins of baked beans. And that's what he'd eat, so he wouldn't eat the Indian food.
That's rock and roll.
That's rock and roll. What?
Yeah, he forgot to turn up, so he had to go home.
Forgot a tin.
Yeah.
His baked
But-
beans ran out.
Did you find a problem with the trust element when you was interviewing people, or was he pretty open and straightforward talking to you?
When I was interviewing musicians, well, we were talking about just a little bit earlier how when you're part of a band and you have writers, that in a way, because, say, with Lennon and McCartney, the way that they wrote together, there has to be a trust between you both, or between you all, and you have to be vulnerable. Because otherwise, if the egos get in, then it's all going to be mine, you know. And so I noticed with all these musicians, say Phil Collins, you know, or any of them, they all talk about this thing that you have to trust each other, and then you don't feel you're being criticised, and you don't mind if they say, well, let's put this in instead of that, because there's a general trust and humility there.
Yeah, it's like, say, if you change this lyric, it's debated that it's accepted, yet this lyric goes better, structure on this lyric. How did that work for individuals that you interviewed who were solo singers, solo songwriters?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, the trust issue, I suppose, has to be if you're with a band. It doesn't matter if you're, you know.
Yeah, because you can always play with another band member. That was his idea.
But it's interesting that, you know, although I was telling you about this humility and this feeling that music was actually coming through them, often when they talk about the creative process, and when they would get words, lyrics that would just seem to come through, often that would happen when they were sleeping or just about to go off to sleep. So a lot of the songwriters actually slept with pad and pencil by the bed. And a few of them said that sometimes they would be just going off to sleep and they would just hear a line or a riff, and they would be too lazy to get up and write it down or, you know, record it. And what would happen is that sometime later they would hear those same words, but somebody else would have got them, which made what they inferred really was that music and the words are all around us. But it depends whether you've got to take it down.
You've got to be tuned into it to pick it up.
Yeah.
So that's what
Yeah.
And also as well, the last thing is, we'll touch on George Harrison if you don't mind. I know George, sort of like being with Lennon and McCartney as the songwriters, George was a prolific songwriter himself, but he wouldn't get his songs onto some of the LPs. Did you witness whether that was frustrating George, or George just accepted that they're the songwriters and I've got my back catalogue anyway? So.
Well, I think if it did frustrate him, he didn't voice it. But I do remember in India he was writing his own songs. So I think he was just waiting for times when he could, you know, put it, whether it was the last one on the album or not. There was a wonderful song, and he also wrote a lot of songs that didn't go on any of the albums. There's one, Beggars in a Gold Mine, that I remember him writing in India, you know, about a lot of people who, you know, would go off to the local towns or the Taj Mahal and would want him to go with them. And he said, you know, I've come here to meditate. I didn't want to go shopping for eggs. You know, so that's what his whole song is about, Beggars in a Gold Mine. Yeah.
And looks like the start of the book is dedicated to George as well.
It is, yes. He was a very dear person, and I loved him very much.
Okay, so it's okay with you. We'll just open it up now for some Q&A. So has anyone any questions for Jenny? Yeah.
I was very interested to hear you say about the creativity coming out of very happy childhoods. But I've also thought that John Lennon was a kind of very troubled man in many ways, and that you know, I've always sort of felt that a lot of creativity comes out of suffering. Do you think there's any kind of mileage in that from people that you talk to?
Yeah, I do, but unfortunately I wasn't able to interview John because I'm sure he would have had definitely a different story. And yeah, there's depression, there's all sorts of things that go with creativity. It's not just, you know, roses, as we know. But I think if one is feeling supported, that counts for a lot. And so, you know, I think my feeling with pretty much all of these, they felt supported in some way with their creativity.
They gave them the confidence.
Gave them the confidence that they needed. Because that would have to carry them through the drive, you know, it's like the courage to create. You need to feel supported.
That's what it is about John, because I think in John's famous words is when he got the guitar, Mimi, who was his guardian, turned around and said, "It's okay for a hobby, but you'll never make a living out of it." So I think it's that sort of thing where on John's maternal side with his mum and his family, they were supporting him, but Mimi was the reluctant one who was saying, "No, you can't really make a living out of playing the guitar." And I think later on, I think he actually framed that quote and sent it to her and put it up on her kitchen wall or something. Was there any other questions? Yes, Dave?
No, look, it sounds like a fascinating book. I'm looking forward to reading it. But obviously you've been lucky enough to interview so many people across the wide musical spectrum. I presume they're not all songwriters, some just musicians as well.
Right.
And so what you're saying about the drive, the creativity of their circumstances all lead them to create what they did. But can you see any common areas in across classes and background, or the age at which they got the bug? All pre-teens or early teens? Or?
Most of them it was early teens.
Yeah.
The ones that were the earlier teens and younger, like say David Crosby, had musical parents. Those that didn't have musical parents seemed to get it a little bit later, but still in their teens.
Yeah, and obviously across, when you compare, George and Paul, basically working class backgrounds, there's somebody like Roger Waters, completely the opposite, but both completely driven in their own way, and they were going to achieve success almost at any cost. Did you feel that speaking to them, that drive, that they were just lucky enough to be in the right circumstances with the right bunch of guys to form a band? Would those people have made it without the bands that they actually ended up with? And would they have, I'm trying to say, do you think they would have gone on to success in any situation?
Probably, because I think that was probably in their makeup, and as I say, that the drive. So, but so much of it is, why did some make it and not others? How much of it is. But there were people that said, I just had this very strong sense of a sort of sense of destiny that this is what was going to happen. So, it did.
It's like if you think the four Beatles, go back to the Beatles again, you touched on George and Paul, but it was mainly that it was Ringo and George was the working class element of the Beatles, and it was Paul and John who was more of the middle class role of the Beatles. And John wrote the song Working Class Hero, and a lot of people have been on the tour to Liverpool to Mendip, and they're surprised when you see John's working class roots, which is a middle class terraced house with front and back gardens. So I can see that when you say sort of like their family background from working class to middle class to upper class, is the drive going to be there? The drive, those reading the book, the drive is there. It doesn't matter what your family background is.
Exactly.
It does come through. You've got something inside you that you want to get out. There's people still do it today, even if they're not famous. You just like going around pubs, clubs, doing the open mic nights, because they've got this drive and passion to do it. Anyone else? Yes, the white sheet, one of the twins who was playing earlier.
Jenny, can I ask, were you surprised that George and Eric could maintain such a great relationship with everything that happened?
With Patty?
Yeah, they best friends.
Did you listen to that?
No, because George, if Patty'd gone off with a dustman, that would be different. But the fact is she all got together with another musician, which is fine. But not only that, it was someone that George respected. So he was a good guitarist. So that made a difference.
Okay, and John at the back there. Yeah.
Do you have any memories of the Apple days? You worked there, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah. Particular memories of it?
Yes, in fact, that's when I'd met Donovan just previously to working in Apple. He was a friend of Patty and George's. And then when I worked at Apple, one day he came into the shop, and Gypsy Dave and their whole entourage, and he was chatting away, and we'd all just come back from Wales before that, and we'd been initiated into TM meditation. So Donovan was very interested and wanted to know more. So we sat and chatted for a while in one of the dressing rooms, And then he asked if I would go to Cornwall with him when he was doing his album From a Flower to a Garden. And so I did, and we sort of became friends. And then it was not long after that that he said he'd got a song he'd written for me and he wanted me to hear it. And that's when he wrote Jennifer Juniper.
Great.
Okay, anybody else? Yes, ladies, yeah?
What have we got to, sorry, I'm a teacher, what have we got to say to modern day curriculum about the squashing of creativity, and whether it be music, art, drama, whatever, what would you say to them?
Good question. Have you heard of someone called Sir Ken Robinson?
Yes.
Yes.
But they want to squash him as well.
They were
Yes.
He's gone to America.
He's gone to America now. What can we do to bring that creativity in, that it's okay to have that drive, even if it seems like it's not a proper job?
I know, it's terrible. I know. I don't know what the answer is, only to let everybody know that, you know, we're all creative, we all have it, we all have something that will give us the creative buzz. But I don't know what the answer is. But you're right.
That's sad.
Mm.
I was hoping
I'm
for
so
an answer.
sorry.
It does seem like
I
it's
don't
a
know if
lost
anybody else has an answer here.
But it does seem like a lost generation, doesn't it?
It's,
When you look at the creative side, it does seem like it's a lost generation.
sad what's happening in schools, that art, drama, music is pushed further and further down.
But
Some
look,
mechanical thing that's...
looking at the other side now, so you be creative with everything that's on the internet and the computers now. You can compose your own songs with every instrument, and if you've still got to drive, I'm sure that the children are still doing it, because I know from my own personal experience, our children do use the music programs on the internet and make their own songs up, and they've still got to drive, but it's not supported, like you say, in the classroom.
It's not supported. So if you're feeling a bit uncomfortable or a bit lacking in confidence about it, it's really difficult. And if you're a teacher pushing that stuff, it's like, whoa, you know.
Well, I don't know, in Liverpool, the Beatles are actually on the national curriculum now, so so we actually go around, we give talks to classes on the national curriculum, so the Beatles have made it onto the national curriculum now in Liverpool. I don't know about the rest of the country, but I'm just speaking for Liverpool.
So I hope that everyone in here with kids or grandkids or whatever will sort of try and find a way of getting that back into schools.
It's quite strange, just veering off for a second, but when we go around to the schools doing the Beatles national curriculum, and we talk about you've got to get a record out, and then we actually show them a vinyl record, you don't recognise them.
Yeah.
You don't recognise what a vinyl record is. And obviously you'd always say, I've got to get a record out, my record's this, my record's that. But when they actually physically see a vinyl record, they're so impressed with seeing a piece of plastic. And then we play it for them and they're more impressed. And you can see the creativity coming out of some of the children in the classroom.
But everyone here has a responsibility to get that creativity back into the curriculum. Otherwise I'm going to throw myself off a cliff at some point. It is so depressing. It really is.
Okay, anybody else? No?
Sorry, I've killed the whole atmosphere.
No. That's a chap at the back.
Yeah, I just thought it was a very interesting story about India and the Prudence. And I know, I believe anyway, John Lennon wrote Sexy Sadie originally about Maharishi, which was changed for political reasons, I don't know. But and that seems to reflect some quite strong disillusionment with the meditation movement and so on, and yet George went in a different way, I think, and was very, made a huge difference to him. I just wonder what your take on that is. I mean, was it, in the end, was it all a, did he make a fool of everyone, or was it something very worthwhile?
It was something that was very worthwhile. It was something that, when I think of it, we were so naive. We were all so young and so naive. And I think for the Beatles, after having all that exposure, then to be in the middle of nowhere up in the Himalayas with nothing but just, you know, each other and meditation.
And baked beans.
And baked beans. But Maharishi, he was very naive too, because he would talk about, you know, wanting to do things in gold aeroplanes and you know, just so the meditation itself was okay. And I know George continued meditating years later, and I still meditate. And so I think it did have some good. But there is a little anecdote that comes with this, actually, that when we were leaving, and Maharishi had been alerted to the fact that his prize troop were leaving, and so he was sitting on this chair, and his guy who looked after him holding the umbrella above him, you know, because it was so sunny. And we all walked along the path towards the waiting taxis, and he kept saying, "But why are you going? Why are you going?" And John said, "Well, if you're so bloody cosmic, you should know."
Okay then, has anybody else or? No. Okay. Jenny's going to be doing some book signings just on the side there. The book, it's an excellent book. It's a really good read, and it's priced at £7.99 if you want to see Jenny and have a little chat to her as well. She'll just be at the back of the room doing book signings. Okay then. Thanks very much.